Mark scooped up the syringe, but his body resisted. In an act of rebellion against himself, he thrust the barbed needle into his shoulder. He fell backwards as the world crashed in on him. There were 6 heartbeats in the service station shop. 2 were smokers. One of those was likely to die from emphysema within the next 8 months. That was, if they lived past tonight. They all stared at Mark intently. One corner of the roof over the pumps housed a nest of a few hundred European hornets. An incessant buzzing vibrated through Mark's head. This was matched only by the unrelenting drone of floodlights, the pulsating tungsten etched into his brain. Mark caught the stench of a decaying prawn sandwich that was lodged behind the chiller cabinet in the shop. Hadn't been there long, but in another 4 days, everyone would know. Magma roared beneath his feet, desperately seeking fissures in the crust to free itself, and a dandelion grew.
Venus and her sister planet concludes their 3,000-year cycle. Stargazers amass to witness this once-in-a-lifetime event, but not Mark. His life is about to change. Mark's chance encounter with the cold but intangibly carnal Kiko sets him plummeting into freefall. Kim, his emphatic but emotionally charged wife, moonlights with a shadowy organisation whose intentions are far from transparent. She needs to blame someone for the disappearance of their daughter 20 years ago. No solace is offered by her egocentric therapist who's engrossed in his own agenda. Plagued by visions, Mark struggles to maintain his grip on reality and descends into a vividly violent web of darkness. As Mark's world spirals beyond his control, it's quite possible this cycle will not end smoothly. Marked was written by Stuart Park and published by the Sinister Horror Company in 2016. In this episode of Sinister Reread, Justin Park talks with Stuart about one of the publisher's most enigmatic titles. So I'm here today with Stuart Park. Anybody that knows me and knows my surname will think, Park, that sounds familiar. And you'd be right. We are related. We are in fact brothers. Stu is my older brother. And we had the honour of publishing his book Marked, a very strange and interesting book, unlike anything else that the Sinister Horror Company has published. So I'm here today with Stu. So hi Stu.
Hello.
Stu, so I want to talk today about your book Marked. As I say, it's an interesting book. When we look at horror books, we look at things like werewolves and zombies and vampires and ghosts. There's all these familiar tropes that kind of happen in horror. And when I look at Marked, and it's a very different kind of horror. It's horrific. There's a lot of dread in there. There's a lot of strangeness going on. So it's a very different style of book than say like a slasher style from Punch.
Yeah.
So I guess the first thing that I sort of start off with was that this being your debut in so far only book that you've written and released. Why did you write the book?
Why did I write the book? So I remember, first of all, when you started Sinister Horror Company, you asked me if I wanted to write anything. And I remember saying to you, if I wrote anything, it'd probably sound like an instruction manual. And you said, okay then. So that lodged in the back of my head. And once you actually started Sinister, I was involved in proofreading a lot of the work as well. So actually got a flavour of what's going on, and that kind of, got me a bit more interested. And then the whole writing process started with something pretty horrific, actually. So back in 2015, I injured my knee during sport. I severed my ACL, tore my meniscus, and I went from basically exercising almost every day to nothing at all. So all of a sudden I had all this time on my hand, and got quite down and depressed because of it. So I thought, well, I might as well try and use this time. So I did. So went in from operation on my knee. I don't know how good the anaesthetic was, but 2 days after I come out of that, I started writing marked. So just from reading the book, you can see how good those drugs were, probably. So it was a way of just passing that time initially.
Because you couldn't do any activity anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was on crutches. I couldn't walk properly. I couldn't drive for several months. So I was pretty much homebound. Needed to fill that time. And there's only so many films and things you can watch. I needed to be a bit more creative.
Right.
And get some of that out, some of that frustration and tension, just get it released.
Well, that's interesting. That was something I was going to ask, was that there is an anger seething through the text of Marx, and I wondered, was that an emotion you were feeling during the time when you were writing the book?
Oh, absolutely. And during that same time period, also wrote the short story Oranges of Orange, right?
Which featured in the Blackwood manuscripts too. Exactly.
And if you read that one, that's full of anger and stuff. So I got a lot of my anger out with that short story, which is why this one, you get dark humour in it. It is a lot of anger and frustration and stuff, but you get humour in it, so it was not so heavy as that short story.
And did you find writing Marx like a form of therapy? Did it help to release that frustration to make you feel better?
Absolutely. Yeah, it just for a start, it gave me something to focus on.
Yeah.
Right? So rather than just sat there just moping about, it gave me a reason to, I was still working at the same time. I could still work from home and stuff, but when I wasn't working, it gave me something to focus on, something to go, okay, I'll finish work now, let's get on with the next chapter. What else can we do with these characters in this story? So yeah, just trying to make use of that time that I had off, really.
So you've already talked about the initial push was you becoming injured and not being able to do things, and medication from the doctors being an inspiration. I wondered, where else did you draw your inspiration from to create such a weird tale? Was there any? Where did you get your ideas for the book?
Well, even though I'd never really thought about writing before, what I'd always had was this ongoing document, and in this document I'd put in like web links, random quotes, ideas I've got, and I had this thing ongoing for several years. So when I decided I'm going to write something, I basically read through this thing, picked out loads of random things that I might be able to string together. A lot of it was nonsense, and just see what I could do with that. So for example, the leather-clad Japanese girl, so essentially Kiko, that come directly from there. That was just an idea that I had about they were going to be some kind of little group of assassins and things, and so I just picked out one of those characters and just rolled with that.
So you picked your ideas up from you say you had a list of stuff that you used to collect. So talk me a bit more about that. Where did you get what was this list, and how long were you collecting it? What kind of things?
So it was years, and it was literally just things that I would overhear, little stories. So there's a story in there, a little conversation between two chefs, and it's a very cyclical kind of conversation. And I actually overheard that on a train between two people, and I was like, I kind of adapted it obviously for the story, but I was like, I like that. So you might read that and think that's nothing to do with the story, but I just liked that so much, and it just fit it into the context.
So that was a real life observation.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of it, like there's a line that goes on about, because Mark being a gardener, there's a line about pruning his hysteria sort of thing, which is obviously a play on the word wisteria. So, and that I overheard from somebody as well, sort of public transport or something. So there's just little things. So just keep your eyes and ears open basically when you're out and about, and just pick things up from around you.
So you had that picked up from around you. Was there any other places you pulled this inspiration from?
Oh, absolutely. So tend to consume a lot of media, films and stuff like that, but one of my biggest influences was probably Lost. Okay,
The TV series.
TV series.
Yeah.
So there's, I know it's got a very mixed reaction, but I love the fact that yes, you'd have a mystery, then you peel back that onion skin, and then there's another mystery, and then there's another one, and you just open up this can of worms every episode that you watch. And I know it annoyed some people, but I loved it. I loved the fact you could tell a story like that. And even though Mark does not like Lost, there's several things in there. So, you know, you have the underground city sort of thing, and then the Kiko the Go, and you've got all these different elements that kind of layer on top of each other. But there's plenty of other stuff. So David Lynch, for example, was a huge influence, and I was quite pleased when reading some of the reviews, some people describe my work as Lynchian. I thought, I've done it, right? I've done it with the first one, so that's brilliant. But the thing I like about Lynch is the fact that even though his films are not classed as horror films, there's definitely horror elements in there. You take like Eraserhead, which I actually mention in the book as well, and just other abstract stuff. So before I started all this, I did an abstract photography book, so the whole concept abstract thing was in my brain. Fight Club Chuck, so really love his work, hugely influenced by his flowing style, just the way he just keeps that story going, keeps that narrative going regardless of what's going on, and you're like, okay, you know, it might not make any sense, but it's just so easy to read. And I tried to not mimic his style, but that kind of flow throughout it. And also things like Alan Watts, which some people may not know of. So he was a philosopher back in the 60s, 70s sort of time frame, and he was responsible for like bringing Zen Buddhism and stuff to the West, you know, introducing these concepts to a Western audience. And some of it is absolutely fascinating, and I've certainly built elements of that into Marx, some subtly, some not so subtly, but yeah, so when it comes to influence, there's so many things out there. I can pull from everything.
So that's your influences and your inspiration. When you actually came to write the book, and this being the first time you've tackled a piece of long fiction, how did you go about actually writing the book?
So like I said, so I come out after that operation. It was just a case of sitting down, going through all the things spinning around my head, going through my list of ideas, and just jotting some things down. So I almost wrote the book backwards. So I knew how it was going to end, and I knew I needed an axe, for example. And it's like, oh, why would this character have an axe? And it's like, make him a gardener. Okay, now that's got his job defined. And then I built in gardening into the actual story. So I pretty much wrote the thing backwards.
So you started with an end scene.
I knew how it was going to end, definitely. Yeah, I knew what that end scene was going to look like. And in fact, one thing I do is I tend to see the scenes in my head almost like as a storyboard,
Yeah.
sort of thing. And once I've got that in my head and it plays for like a few seconds, I just write that down. The characters, the environment, who they're with, what they're saying. Yeah, and that's basically how I put it together. So the whole thing probably took me from nothing to the first draft about 6 weeks, which was actually pretty quick for me because I'm not the fastest writer in the world anyway. And then from that point, it probably took another, I think it was just less than a year between actual conception and release. And in that we've got like artwork and editing and formatting and stuff, but the main bulk of the story was actually within that first 6 weeks. And it was interesting because when I did the very first run through of it, it was only ever about Mark. And because of course I had other members of his family, like his wife Kim and his daughter Kate. So I actually went back and actually created chapters for some of the other characters, which is why there's quite a few characters with Kim in there now. And actually talking to some people, they probably prefer Kim as a character, right? So I never had a plan from the beginning. There was nothing that was sketched out apart from this end scene and getting to that. But again, just coming back to the layer thing, it all just mounted out. Okay, we've got the Mark story sorted out, and then we've got the Kim story, and then you've got the Kiko story, and just all these things layered up, and just Yeah, I mean, fortunately, it's a fairly short story, so it's not too complex to hold all in your head, so I could get away with that. But yeah, it seemed to work.
So that's interesting. You talk about holding it in your head, and you talk about creating these layers. So, how did you create these layers? And so did you plan this? Did you started with your end scene? Did you then write a plan out from start to end, or did you just start writing the story, and then add bits in when you came up with different plot lines?
It was. I wanted it to be about a family, so Mark and his family first of all, and I wanted to establish that this was a seemingly normal family. Okay, that it starts off with something pretty horrendous, and that sets up the backdrop for the rest of the story. So all these characters have got this in their history, but the first half of the book is mainly about just them and them interacting with them, each other and the world and everything, and then just stuff happens, especially to Mark, and it's just how did he deal with that? How would he deal with that? He's almost like some unwilling puppet, if you like. Things just happen to him, and he's just trying to make the best of it, really.
So, how did you create it? Were you just writing? They sometimes refer to it as pantsing, writing on the seat of your pants. You've got the idea in your head, and then you're just going with the flow, or did you have the elements written down before, like planned out?
There was some elements, definitely. So like with, I knew I wanted Kiko, I knew I wanted the act of the end, I knew about like Yokinara, I knew I had all these elements, but I didn't quite know how they were all going to fit together. And then once I started writing it, and because I made Mark a gardener, it's like, okay, well that could be the reason why things, things go off in the tangent and they do, and that can be the reason why Kate ended up how she did. So there was no grand plan from the start. Definitely not. There was small little ideas which I then kind of pieced together into this overall story. And I don't know if that shows reading it. You probably need to ask someone else other than me whether that actually flows or not.
And once you completed that first draft, was there much in the way of revision? How many drafts did it take to get to the end, and what did you revise?
Oh, plenty. So it went out to a number of proofreaders, including yourself. I got loads of feedback. It was all good. Most of it was very, very positive, actually. But it was just kind of tidying up the story. There was no one come back with any glaring major plot points or errors or things or you can't do that because you've done this over here, for example. This breaks your own rules or something. So after that first draft of the story, I would say it was probably 95% complete, and then it was just a case of tidying it up, getting the formatting properly. So
if we could take a look at the book itself, actually go into the actual content of it, what would you say are the themes and the messages that you're exploring within Marked?
So yes, there's a few. So obviously I mentioned family. So it starts with this tragic event, and then it shows like the ups and downs of family life. And it's one thing I liked about the film Hereditary, for example. So I see that as like a family drama with supernatural elements going on rather than a full-on horror film. And that's what I liked about that film. It's not just about the horror, it's about the people first of all, and then you've got they're dealing with these horrendous things are going on in their life, and that's kind of what I wanted to capture in Marked as well. Obviously it's about loss in terms of family, grief, and also loss of control, especially Mark later on in the book and how he deals with that. What I wanted to do, so I was trying to get away from the whole good guy, bad guy thing, right? So there's a lot of films these days, there's definitely a good guy and there's a bad guy and there's warring factions, and I didn't want that. I just wanted a story about people dealing with stuff, and just trying to be a bit more human with the story. which is why I kind of showed multiple sides to the same character. So I think to show that they are actually human, and they do good things and they do bad things, as we all do. So yeah, they're not all, you know, pristine white Luke Skywalkers sort of thing, or evil bad Darth Vaders. So,
not just black and white. It's all about
exactly.
the blend of the grey.
Yes, and that's those grey bits I find more interesting.
Which is interesting. Which is actually, when you look at the dedication on the front of the book, dedicated to myself and my other brother. I'll just get that in. But you do actually say the black and white to my grey.
Yeah, absolutely. So I see you and Gav as kind of almost extremes of my own personality, sort of thing, and I'm fitting kind of in the middle there. So I've definitely taken influences from both of your attributes. Yeah.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. You probably didn't know that before.
I didn't know that before.
That's why it's in there. That's why I've got the whole black, white, and grey bit in there.
Yeah. So then, looking at the book as a package, one of the things I always like to have a look at is the cover. You were the one that kind of unusually led on the cover. Normally with Sinister, it's a kind of a collaboration between the two, but you kind of took that one sort of 100% by yourself. So could you tell me a little bit about that, how the cover came about, what input you had into it, and how it evolved to get to where it is now? Sure.
So I had the concept of featuring Kiko on the cover, and I wanted to show off the knife and the severed finger, because that's quite prominent in the story. So I had that as an idea, and then I approached our very talented cousin George Wiles, who's actually done a number of Sinister covers now, isn't he?
Yes, and, yes, he's done many. This, I believe, was the first one.
This was his first one, so we were both virgins at it. So my first book, his first cover. But so the story goes, he didn't even know he could draw. His kids asked him one day if he could draw some of the characters off of Frozen, the film Frozen, and he did, and he realised he could draw. So he had this latent ability. And it's like, oh, okay. So yeah, it's definitely wanted to make use of that. But going through the whole process was fantastic. I would spend literally hours on the phone with him. I mean, you look at the picture of Kiko, and it looks fairly simplistic, right? But we spoke about every single element in that picture, and whether it be the shape of the eyes, the length of the eyes, the nose. But the thing that always gets me is just the hair, just the reflection from this light source in Kiko's hair, and you can pick out the individual strands. That to me, just I'm not an artist in terms of painting and stuff, and drawing, but that was amazing. I just love that.
And it was interesting. What I found was the colour scheme. So especially in the early days of Sinister, we very much seem to have a black and red theme that would go through our covers. Now you have black and red on there as well, but unusually you had another colour on there that was most prominent and not seen in a lot of horror books. No,
so I wanted to, again, it's like horror, not horror sort of thing. So it's like, let's have more white on there, right? So I make the point of Kiko dressing in white leather and all the rest of it, so I wanted to reflect that. But when you flip the book over, it tends to get more black as you go to the back, and that's kind of following that through. So there's almost clues on the cover. Start with white, start with Kiko, and then you fade around to black on the back and mix that up with red. So yeah, there's a lot going on. Nothing's an accident.
So nothing's an accident. So then we'll go into detail. Talk about the chapter covers. So the image of those on the front. You got a turtle. Who did that? How did that come about? And why the turtle?
So that was my other half, Claire. So she does these great what can only describe as scribble drawings, which doesn't sound very good, right? But they're amazing because it just, so she gets the outline of what she wants to draw and almost scribbles in the details, and when you look at it, it looks like it's done really quickly, but there's a lot of work that goes into this, and I just like that kind of style. And I thought, you know what, I'm gonna have a pitch like that in Marked. And the reason why the turtle, there's a few turtle references in Marked for anyone who wants to picked them all up. So I was just trying to highlight that.
You are a big music fan. I know because
Yeah, indeed.
I've known you all my life, and you've known me most of yours. So one of the things that I always find fascinating when people are creating a book is a long and it's a lengthy process, and it's a time that you spend majoritively by yourself when you're doing the writing. So I wondered, when you were writing the book, were you listening to music at the time of writing or at the time of thinking about it in between the writing? What music was it, and did you find that it influenced you in any way?
So I'm very influenced by music. I love all different types of music, as you well know. But during the actual writing process, I don't have any music on whatsoever. I don't need complete silence. I can work in background noise, but I like there being no distractions, and the only thing going on is what's in my head, sort of thing. So especially if the music's got like lyrics or anything like that. So I have experimented with listening to music since writing Marked and writing, and I can do maybe classical and ambient and like dance music and stuff, but anything with lyrics, no, I just concentrate on the lyrics rather than what's in my head. So I would spend a lot of time in complete silence, staring into the corner of the room, just seeing the images in my head and then just trying to write these things down. So no, I didn't listen to anything actually whilst the actual writing process was happening.
That's interesting, and to be fair, unusual from people that I speak to. So that's when you're doing the writing. When you go back and doing the editing and the redrafting, is that the same case as well? Do you need silence? Are you listening to music then, or do you find that you speak the words in your head, or do you say them out loud?
I do speak them in my head, and I find anything conflicting will just pull me off on a tangent, and I completely forget what I'm doing. So if there's anything that involves reading or writing words, I tend not to listen to any music at all. I mean, if especially if it's something I need to concentrate on. If I'm just reading for fun, I might just, I might have, like I say, some ambient or classical on in the background, but it certainly won't be prominent. But yeah, if I need to concentrate, then I need to concentrate, basically.
I'm going to go delve a little bit more into the actual content of the book here. One of the things that you mentioned already is the fact that nothing in the book is an accident. From the dedication on the front, talking about grey, to the colour scheme going from white to black around the outside. I'm just wondering, you've got a whole host of characters in the book, and one of the things that I'm always fascinated with is how people come up with the names of characters or places in the books, and do they have any significance? And I wondered what would be the case in your book, in Marked.
So with Mark himself, he was basically called Mark because he become marked, right, by spoilers, but the Yokinara in the book. That's essentially where that come from. It's just that play on words. But his wife Kim. So I mentioned her daughters Kaylin and Kate. Now it's not an accident. They will start with the letter K, basically. So Kim wanted mini me's of herself, basically. So she had Kaylin, and then at the start of the book, she loses Kaylin, and then later on she has Kate, and it's no accident that she starts with a K. Just to throw something else out there, Kiko also starts with a K. Dramatic pause. I'm not saying anything about that. I certainly don't mention anything about that in the book, but and actually I do say in the book that and that's quite obvious that Kate is a replacement for Kaylin. There's certainly a scene with Kim and her counsellor, and they talk about these things, and she's not denying it basically, but she obviously hates herself because she thinks that's the case. And it's things like so I described Kaylin at the start having blonde hair, the same as Kim, and Kate does not have blonde hair, so that creates that kind of her wanting to be a replacement for Kaylin but not at the same time. So again, it's done the way of causing a little bit of tension in the family. Talking of happy accidents though, so there's there's a band called Dead Can Dance, and they've actually got a track called Kiko, right? And this track to me is simply awesome, is amazing, and that was a happy accident. The fact that I've created this character and one of my favourite songs of all time happens to have the same name. So yeah, maybe it was the vibes, I don't know, but that was a happy accident. Just talking about the characters. So I purposely didn't describe any kind of, apart from like Kim's hair colour and Kate's hair colour, I purposely didn't describe any kind of attributes about the characters at all. I wanted the reader to fill those in, right? So I don't mention, okay, they have Western style names, but I don't mention any colour, race, creed, any of that whatsoever. So anyone reading it, can put that in themselves if they want to. So the only thing that's important is the characters and their actions, sort of thing. So if I do mention an attribute about a character, the chances are there's a reason.
Going on to that point of nothing is an accident.
Yeah, exactly. And I wanted to create them as almost blank slates, right? So you can impose whatever you want on them. You can make them your characters. And the same thing along with that is a location. I never mention, they're in a city. You get the idea of that. It's built up and things going on, but I don't mention where they are. They could be in virtually any country. And it's even the same with I mentioned money a few times, but only in a generic sense like coins. So I don't mention any particular denominations or anything. So again, I wanted to make it as open as possible for readers' own interpretation, set it wherever they want.
So you talk about the it could be set anywhere, but there was one place I particularly noted for a location, and that was Stanswick Sands.
Yes, well, I obviously had to put a reference to Punch in there, didn't I? So, but they visit Stanwick Sands as opposed to live there.
For those that aren't familiar with it, in my book Punch, it's set in a fictitious seaside town called Stanswick Sands, which is then obviously mentioned in Marked. Going back to your book, because that's what we're talking about. You mentioned before that you used beta readers, and you touched on briefly a little bit about feedback. So I wonder if I could explore that a little bit more. What was your reaction from your beta readers to the book?
Yeah, I mean, they were all very kind, actually. It was generally well received. I'd say there was nothing glaringly wrong, and that was good, because this is the first people that had read the story other than me, right? So up to that point I might have told people about bits of it, but those are the first people to consume the whole thing and actually get some feedback from.
That was the first people that had read your first book that you'd written. So on that extension from there, the book's ready, it's about to come out, it's about to be released. How are you feeling on the verge of the release of this book going out to people that you've never met before, that can read it and they can put up online exactly how they feel? How do you think?
Yeah, I mean, obviously on one hand, just so excited to get something that I've been nurturing for almost a year now out into the wild, but at the same time just equally as nervous just to know how it's going to be received, because there's going to be other people that I know that's going to read it and comment on it, but obviously complete strangers. And I have to say, looking at I've got a number of reviews on Amazon and things, and generally very positive.
And that's it. So once it then did come out, as you say, you got some reviews on Amazon that were positive. How did you feel when it was out? Were you one of these people that were checking sales and checking reviews each day, or did you just look on to the next project? How did you feel at that point?
So yeah, I mean, obviously your first book, you're going to go overboard with it. So within the first couple of weeks I was checking sales every day, see how they were doing, but then again, I wrote it for me, really, because this is what I wanted to read, this is what I wanted to consume. So the fact that I've released it and it's there for sale, that bit was almost unimportant. Do you know what I mean? If people wanted to buy it and have some feedback, then that's absolutely fantastic, but I didn't do it to make money or anything. That was never the intention. I say most of it was to try and pass that time whilst I was recovering, and be creative within that process as well. So
You talked then about the reviews that you come back. You said they were mostly positive. I mean, what was the critical reaction? Can you go into a bit more detail? And interestingly, how did you take that critical reaction?
So I did get some more negative reactions, mainly around the story being confusing in places, which I completely understand. Some things are left unanswered. Right? I don't tie up all the plot points, absolutely.
And was that a deliberate point? You talk about a David Lynch influence, which he very much does that. I'm not going to tie things up. This is just going to be left hanging. So was that deliberate on your point?
Yeah. So for example, the story obviously starts with Mark and Kim losing Kaylin, right? But we never find out what happens to her, right, in the book. And that was purposeful. So I actually had a review that said something along the lines of, okay, read the first chapter, we pretty much know how the rest of the book is going to pan out. It's going to be the search for Kaylin, right? There's nothing about that whatsoever. I just wanted that as a backdrop for these characters, so you can get their mindset initially. 20 years ago they lost their 4-year-old daughter. I mean, how would any parents feel, right? So I wanted to set that up as this thing in the back of their mind, which is why when I get to the point in the book where Kate runs off and then she's out with Mark on a job, and then Mark's like, oh my god, I've lost our daughter, right? So all those feelings are going to come back in. How am I going to explain this to my wife, and who seems to have taken it very, very badly anyway, right? So yeah, so kind of referencing what happens at the start, but again, I don't tie that plot point up with what happened to Kaylin.
Thank you. That was interesting. Sorry, going back then. So the critical reaction.
So some things were confusing. For example, how did Mark get infected? So I do actually answer that in the book. There's a few dead ends that I throw in there as well, but if you follow through the narrative, you can actually work out how he gets infected and ends up where he does at the end. I think part of the problem is I mentioned Chuck and trying to emulate his kind of style as in his flow. I wrote Mark to be very fast paced, so you can just read through it, just one sentence after another, nothing, you kind of don't stumble on anything at all. And maybe it's too fast paced. Maybe if you read it too quickly, you can easily lose information in there. And I did consider maybe throwing in some points, some description or whatever, just to try and slow the narrative down and get people to stop and think. But it's like, no, I just wanted to keep it going. And it's there for if people wanted to consume it again, because I know with it's funny, what one of the reviewers pinged me, and he'd already read it 3 or 4 times, and he was pinging me asking me about some Japanese superstitions and things he think it might have been based on. And I was, trying not to be too direct in my answers. And after we'd chatted for about an hour, he was like, oh, I think I'd have to go and read it again now. So yeah, we obviously ended up reading it 4 or 5 times just to try and make sense of it. But you can read it pretty quickly. You can probably read it in a few hours, just because it's got that pace. So the pace is good on one hand, but maybe could have slowed it down on the other hand. The other thing that a lot of people struggle with is what genre to place it in. Going back to, it's got horror elements in it, but it's also got the whole family stuff, drama, thriller, supernatural. But of course that was done on purpose as well. I kind of like the horror non-horror thing. It's not like a full-on gore fest. I understand that as humans we like to put things in boxes, we like to tie things up, and we like to point at something and go, that's a tree or that's a frog or whatever, but I didn't want that with this. And of course putting things in boxes is very useful, right? So if I went out, if I'm hungry, I want to go out and buy a sandwich, I want to come back with a brick, right? So these things are very, but when it comes to something like art, I think exploring those grey areas is a little more interesting. It's like, for example, Everyone knows what a head is, and everyone knows what a neck is. But where is that point where your head ends and your neck begins, right? Where is that absolute point? Don't know, right? And it's those grey areas that I kind of like. Some of my author blurb, I say something along the lines of, so when you eat a banana, when does that stop being a banana and end up being you? What is that point? Is it once it's in your mouth or once you've digested it? So again, it's those kind of grey areas that I kind of like. Then we start getting a bit zen, right? We just got getting into all of that. But yeah, going back to the whole non-horror thing. So again, this comes back to people like David Lynch with The Razorhead, Lost Highway, Inland Empire. They all definitely got horror elements, but they're not actually horror films. Even films like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, right? There's some pretty horrific scenes in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, especially as a kid. Killing of a Sacred Deer, or even Watership Down. Remember watching that as a kid. There's some horrific bit, but it's not a horror film, right? But then you have films that go the other way. They're almost horror, but almost not horror. Things like Midsummer, which is that really? I mean, it is a horror film, but it's all set in the day. Or things like Get Out, Clockwork Orange. Even is Clockwork Orange a horror film? Don't know. So that's the kind of areas that I like to explore.
So it's like the challenging of the tropes.
Yeah, and it's dealing with, it's a story first, and then you've got horror elements on the top, rather than just being an all-out blood splattered gore fest.
You talked, with regards to the critical reaction, you talked about things of like what you might have done differently. So what I'm also interested in is the things that you did do differently. Was there any, what I like to call outtakes, any ideas that you cut out that you'd originally written, or ideas that you changed whilst you were creating it? Like you had an original thought it was going to go this way, but then you changed it to another way.
Yeah, quite a few in fact. So the original story, it was going to be about a killer tattoo. So, and I had this whole scene at the start. I never actually wrote it, but I had it in my head whereby there was this guy and he was on the rampage in some block of flats. He was like injuring or killing people, and once he calmed down, or he ended up killing himself or something, then the police and the paramedics got called in. The paramedic come and attended to this guy, who then got infected. He got taken back to the hospital, and then all hell broke loose from there. So obviously the story was very different from that in terms of what happened, but I kept the kind of tattoo bit. And in fact, I think even the title of my file where all my notes was something like Tattoo, right? Because that's where it all started. Yeah, so Kiko being the little Japanese girl clad in white leather. So I do mention a few others initially when we meet Kiko, and I wanted these to be like little groups that hung around on the streets, and they're like assassins. Like everyone fears them and no one goes near them, but they're these little 15-year-old Japanese girls or something who just like cause havoc. Because I didn't really do anything with that idea, but I just took that one element. I wanted to explain the story from TV and news reports as well. So you'd hear things on TV or the radio, and that would explain what's actually happening in the story. And it's not the most original trope, but I kind of like that as an idea. I did a little bit of that with the Missile Cam TV, but it doesn't really explain the story so much. And I found a website that explained a whole bunch of Japanese myths and superstitions, and I started reading through them thinking, well, maybe I could use some of this, but got to the point I was so overwhelmed because there's so many of them. I'll stop that and I'll just carry on with the idea that I have. So if it ended up being similar to anything that's out there, then I may have taken some influence from that. Yeah, so there was plenty of stuff that I took out or never even made it from the beginning.
And what would you say you were most proud of with the book?
So I think most of the things we do today are very transient, right? And the fact you can produce a tangible thing. And once I got that first proof copy of Marked through the post, and you can actually hold this thing in your hand and go, you know what? I did that. Yeah, and just that's so satisfying to be able to see your work like that. It's Yeah, and just the idea of anyone spending time reading my words just seems to be a crazy concept for me. I spent a long time doing them, and just now it's out there, and anyone could go ahead and read them. It's just, yeah. I mean, like I say, I've got some fairly positive reviews, so just hope people that have read it took some pleasure in reading it.
We've talked quite a lot about details that are in the book. We've talked about the fact that nothing is frivolous put in there. Everything has a meaning. Everything has had a thought behind it. So with that in mind, is there any details in the book you think are overlooked that you'd like to sort of talk about or bring to our attention?
Well, this this was the main reason for my quiz at the end, right? So you get to the end and you read the quiz and you think, oh, okay, all of these answers are in the book somewhere. Some of them require a bit of Googling, but...
The most unusual feature, the only book I've known to have a quiz at the end about the book. Are you reading? Have you read carefully?
Exactly. It's like, have you been paying attention?
So this was there to highlight details in the book?
Yeah, it was to draw people's attention to it, and also it would give, hopefully, the reader another reason to read it. Right, so they can actually go through and maybe try and tick some of these things off. Maybe that would slow the reader down enough to actually, okay, I can see what you're trying to do there. I can see the answer to that. For example, and I'll give you this one. So I had a question: why wouldn't the fish take the feed from Mark? Right. So there's a scene where he's in the underground city and he's feeding the fish, and they wouldn't take its feed. And the answer is because they were koi carp.
Oh, bad joke.
Proper dad joke. But, there's a few of those in there.
So with the quiz, so at the end of the book, there are 10 questions. 10 questions that are based on the book itself. So I have to ask, has anybody actually answered all the questions? Have they got back to you with it?
No. Yeah. Still time. Another thing people might not pick up on is obviously crossover with your books. You obviously mentioned one thing, but
the Stanwick Sands thing,
Stanwick Sands.
Yeah.
But there's at least 2 or 3 other references to your book. Some are more subtle than the others, so they're definitely in there. I wanted that crossover. And there's one that is very subtle. I mentioned it before, and I might mention it again. So, Kiko, Kalen, any link between them? There's a scene near the start where Mark goes to work and takes his daughter Kate with him, and they get in the van and they turn on the radio, and it starts playing a song. I wanted that to be Good Morning by the Beatles, right? But of course you put the lyrics and then you start thinking, oh, these are all copyright, so I can't use these lyrics. So I actually changed all the lyrics apart from the Good Morning reference.
Oh, really?
So if you read the lyrics, they should be in time with the music
to the Beatles,
to the actual original Beatles track. So that took me longer than I care to mention, just for something that was very throwaway, right? But it's definitely in there. But other things like the name of the pub that Mark and Sadir go in, there's what's that?
What is the name of the pub?
You'll have to read the book
again.
So one big thing I want to do. So there's a number of times where Mark has like visions, right? So, and the way I segregated that is, so most of the book is written in past tense, and the visions are written in present tense. And near the start of the book, it's very obvious, the dividing line between, okay, there's this whole chapter here, or there's a whole paragraph here, and you can definitely see that's a vision, right? But as you get near the end of the book, there's some things happen, and it's not quite so segregated. And the only way you can tell is by the difference between past and present tense. Especially in the last few chapters.
Oh, that's interesting.
So you can actually tell from that what is meant to be real and what is not real, sort of thing.
If you notice it.
If you notice it.
As a reader, you can read by that and potentially just not pick that up.
Yeah, or you might read it and go, why has he made all these mistakes by jumping between tenses? But it's very purposeful.
So you mentioned about the Beatles.
Yeah.
We talked about music earlier and how important music is to you, what a big music fan you are, even though shock horror, you don't listen to any music when you actually do the writing, so that doesn't influence it at all. But one of the things, as well as being the only book I know that has a quiz in the back of it, it's the only book I know where the author has created an entire soundtrack album by themselves, and you've done this with Marked, haven't you?
Yeah, definitely. So even before I started writing, I was always keen on making music and things, and I always wanted to write a soundtrack for a film, right? So what better reason than to write a book and then write a soundtrack for the film that doesn't yet exist, right? So why not? So heavily influenced by most forms of music, but especially things like drum and bass, techno, classical, ambient, that kind of thing, and you'll find a lot of that in the soundtrack. A lot of the titles are taken from references to parts in the book, and some of them kind of tie up with the actual events that happen around there. But yeah, I wanted something very kind of eclectic. So you had action points where you got some beats going on, got some drum bass going on, but you had some more mellow kind of stuff, almost like a proper sound score. There's actually a point where Mark goes into Soprano, the Underground City, and he goes into this club, and there's these heavy like techno beats, and I kind of represented that with, I think it's the last track, This Is Therapy, and because the This Is Therapy bit also then ties up with the conversation that Kim and Oliver have, which ends up pretty nasty in the end. So because it's quite stompy techno, it kind of shows the anger and aggression that comes out between the two characters. And there's certain themes that I do replicate across some of the other tracks, as you would get in like a normal film score, right? You would have these themes going across, and sometimes this theme would have a positive feel to it, and other times a negative feel. So you kind of take that across the story. The idea was I put it up on Bandcamp or something.
Is it still available there?
Yeah, it's definitely still available there. That was good fun. It was definitely good fun making the soundtrack.
I've gone through and I've asked a lot of questions. What I find when people turn around and ask me questions, I might come away from it thinking, well, there's something I didn't quite get to say. So I just kind of wondered, although we've talked a lot around the book, is there anything else that you'd like to talk about with regards to the book that we haven't covered, stuff that maybe nobody else asks or gets lost, or you just want people to be aware of?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things actually. So even though I've made the world a very blank slate, you can kind of see that it's set today. There's mobile phones and things and everything that you'd recognise, but also do chuck in a few things that you wouldn't see in today's world. For example, the reason why Kate didn't go to school that particular day, it was a teacher contentment day, which isn't a thing that exists, right? But in this world it does. And Sudhir's wife is on fertility leave. I don't think that's a thing, right? But it could well be. And if you looked at a film like Children of Men, right, that could well be a thing, right? And also things like I mentioned a woolly mammoth rug. Yeah, so you have to think, well, is that happening in this world? And also the whole missile cam TV and drones, which are just kind of in the background, just to tinge the world, just to show you that there's a bigger picture of things going on, which I never really touch in this story. But yeah, there's stuff going on that you don't quite know about. It just means that we're not in the same world as we are now. It's almost like a Black Mirror world. You kind of 20 years into the future or something. Something else that I can't remember who sent it to me. It was either you or George. Sent me a picture of somebody actually had a tattoo on their leg of Kiko, of the girl on the cover of Marked, which is just amazing. And it's just like, I remember talking to George about it, and it's just like, wow, somebody's actually put this permanent thing on their body and happened to be the cover of the first book that I've ever produced, and the first cover that George worked on. So yeah, we were gobsmacked by that. That was absolutely amazing.
What an accolade. So someone that had read the book and then gone and got the image and put it...
Yeah, I don't even know who this guy was. I just know that it was forwarded on, and yeah, wow. Something else I've been working on, and I've literally just finished the first draft, is actually a sequel to Marked. Now, it's not your typical sequel because there's events that happen in the sequel that start the sequel off. It actually happened during the time that Marked took place, and then there's certain things that happen alongside, and in fact the epilogue from Marked ends up as a chapter in the sequel, so you can actually see where that crossover point is. So it's almost like the next day, and we carry on with some of the characters that we still have left, and I introduce new characters, but yeah, it just definitely furthers the story from what I started with Marked.
Thank you very much, Stu, for taking a trip down memory lane. I know it was a few years back since Marked had been released, so I know you had to have a good old think about the creative process, but I really appreciate that. Thank you ever so much.
No, thank you for the opportunity to allow me to talk about it. Thank you for your time.
Marked by Stuart Park is available on paperback and Kindle. The Kindle can be purchased from Amazon, and the paperback can be found through most book retailers, including Waterstones, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and directly through us at our website, sinisterhorrorcompany.com. Thank you for listening. Being an independent publisher, we are just like you. We share the same passion, the same love for horror fiction. We believe in the incredible work being created, unnoticed by the mainstream. And we want to share it with the world. We are the Sinister Horror Company.